You know, when you think about the history of terrorism, it can feel, well, just chaotic, right? Like a totally unpredictable mess. But what if there's actually a pattern to it all? Today, we're diving into a really powerful theory from historian David Rapoport that organizes this whole complex history into four very distinct waves.
I mean, it's a question we've all probably wondered about. One decade, the news is all about hijackings. The next, it's all about suicide bombings. The faces change, the reasons they give change, the methods definitely change. So you have to ask, is there some kind of method to this madness, or is it all just random?
Well, according to David Rapoport, the answer is a definite no. It is not random. He argues that modern terrorism actually unfolds in a series of big international waves, and each one has its own unique character, its own energy. And honestly, getting a handle on these waves, that's the key to making sense of the whole thing.
Okay, so a theory of waves. But what does Rapoport even mean by a wave? Before we jump into the history, we've got to understand the basic idea here. What exactly makes a wave a wave?
All right, think of it kind of like a ripple spreading across a pond. A wave isn't just one group doing its thing in one country. No, it's an international cycle of activity. The key thing to get is that for a period of about 40 years, so roughly a generation, different groups in different countries all get fired up by a similar goal, and they tend to use a similar set of tactics. It's like they're all reading from the same playbook. And then, just as that wave starts to lose its energy, a new one starts to rise up and take its place.
So, where does this whole story start? We're heading back to the late 19th century, a time of really radical new ideas and some game-changing technology. This is where we see the first wave emerge, the Anarchists.
So this thing really kicked off in Russia back in the 1880s, but it went global fast. And why? Well, new tech like the telegraph and faster steamships meant that ideas and the people carrying them could suddenly zip around the world like never before. Their main strategy, political assassination, hit this horrifying peak with the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Yeah, the event that kicked off World War I. And here's the crazy irony. The massive global war they helped start was the very thing that ended up killing their movement's momentum. Their whole strategy was built around this idea they called propaganda by the deed. The logic was pretty simple, but totally radical for the time. Step 1. Use the shocking new technology of dynamite to kill a king, a president, some high-profile figure. Step 2. This would freak out the government, forcing it to overreact and crack down on everyone. Step 3. The public, seeing this brutal repression, would finally wake up and bam, spark a massive revolution. That was the plan anyway.
All right, moving on to the second wave, the anti-colonialists. See, after World War I, the world was just a different place. The old anarchist playbook of killing tyrants to start a revolution, it just didn't seem to fit anymore. Instead, you had these massive colonial empires starting to crack, and a whole new kind of struggle was taking shape. This one wasn't really about ideology, it was about national identity.
And this wave was really born out of a deep sense of betrayal. You see, after World War I, the big powers were all talking about self-determination, the right of people to rule themselves. But that promise apparently didn't apply if you lived in one of their colonies. So that anger just simmered for decades. Then, fast forward to after World War II. The old empires are broken, exhausted. They can't hold on anymore. And that's when this wave really crests, as countries all over the world fight for and win their independence. By the 1960s, it's mostly wrapped up.
Now, the key here is a total 180 in both tactics and identity. These groups weren't trying to assassinate kings. Instead, they were fighting guerrilla style, hitting the symbols of colonial control. The police stations, the military patrols, it was a war of 1,000 cuts. And, this is huge, they absolutely rejected the label terrorist. In their eyes, they were freedom fighters. Their goal wasn't some big messy revolution. It was a cold, hard calculation. Make the occupation so expensive, so bloody, that the colonial powers would eventually just pack up and go home.
So when you put them side by side like this, the evolution is crystal clear, isn't it? You've got the anarchists who attack the symbols of power, like a czar, to try and spark a revolution from the bottom up. Then you have the anti-colonialists who attack the enforcers of power, the police and army, to win national independence. We're seeing a huge shift from, revolutionary idealism to a much more practical nationalist goal.
Okay, the third wave, the new left. So, the colonial map has been totally redrawn, and now a new global conflict is defining everything, the Cold War. This massive ideological showdown between East and West is what's going to fuel the energy of our third wave. The spark that really lit the fuse for this wave? The Vietnam War. It just created this whole generation of radicalized young people who saw themselves as part of a global fight against American imperialism. And in the 1970s, we see something brand new, truly international terrorism. You had groups from Germany, Japan, Palestine, all training together, working together. A lot of their energy and funding came from the Soviet Union and its allies. So it's no surprise that when the Cold War finally ended, this wave lost a ton of its steam.
And again, the tactics took another sharp turn. The New Left basically weaponized drama. Think about it. Airplane hijackings, kidnappings of famous people, embassy takeovers. These things were made for TV. The violence was like theater, designed to grab headlines and put the world on edge. The whole point was to create these international crises that would make Western governments look weak and, they hoped, inspire a global socialist revolution.
And that brings us to the fourth wave, the religious wave. This is the one that has pretty much defined our own era. As the left-wing ideologies of that third wave started to fade away, a much, much older and in many ways more powerful force stepped in to take its place as the main driver: religion.
Rapoport points to a specific year as the start of this wave, 1979. Why? Because that was the year of the Iranian Revolution. And that event sent an absolute shockwave around the globe. It was proof, living proof, that a movement fueled by pure religious belief could overthrow a powerful modern government. This new kind of energy led directly to a devastatingly effective new tactic: suicide bombing. That became the hallmark of the 90s, and of course, reached its most horrific scale with the 9/11 attacks.
Now, the motivation here is on another level. It's fundamentally different from the other waves. The goals often aren't just political, they're otherworldly. These groups believe they're carrying out a divine command. And that belief led to a terrifying change in tactics. Think about it. Earlier waves often tried to limit casualties because they wanted to win public sympathy. But for many groups in the fourth wave, causing mass casualties wasn't an unfortunate side effect. It was the entire point. And suicide bombing became the ultimate tool for that.
So when you lay it all out like this, the pattern is just undeniable. It's so clear. You can draw a straight line from the anarchists' dynamite to the anti-colonialists' guerrilla ambush to the New Left's hijacked airplane and right up to the religious wave's suicide bombing. Each wave, driven by its own core belief system, developed its own terrible signature tactic.
All right, so why the waves matter? We've just covered more than a century of history, all organized into these four big waves. But what's the point? Why does looking at it this way even matter?
Well, the real power of Rapoport's theory is that it gives us a map for what otherwise looks like just chaos. First, it shows us there are patterns here. It's not just random. Second, it highlights how these things evolve, how each new generation learns from and reacts to the one before it. And maybe the most important point of all, it shows us that these waves have life cycles. They don't go on forever. They rise up, they hit their peak, and eventually they fade away.
And that brings us to a pretty provocative final thought. Remember how each wave lasts about 40 years? Well, the fourth wave kicked off back in 1979. Do the math. We're well past that 40-year mark now. So, if Rapoport's theory holds true, the religious wave might already be losing its energy. And that leaves us with a giant question mark. What comes next? What will the ideology, the technology, and the terrifying tactics of a fifth wave even look like?